For the next segment, Professor Heok will be delivering his keynote lecture for the 5th To Tiang Seng Distinguished Lecture. Professor Heok is a Tan Gyok Kin Professor in Psychiatry and Neuroscience at NUS and Emeritus Consultant at NUH. His early education was at High School Batu Pahat and Muar in Malaysia. He graduated as a doctor from the University of Malaya in 1973 and was in national service with the Malaysian Army as captain in the Medical Corps. Soon after, he left for England and was awarded a 3-year scholarship to study psychiatry at Oxford. After just 2.5 years, he passed the specialist exam of the Royal College of Psychiatrists and was promoted to associate consultant and later consultant. However, his wife did not like the cold, wet English weather and persuaded him to move back to Singapore on Boxing Day 1980 with their 1-year-old daughter, Jade. 2 days later, at MOH, after an interview of just 10 minutes, he was offered a job, but was told that at 32 years old, he was too young to be a consultant in Singapore and should start as a registrar, a junior specialist. After working a year at Woodbridge Hospital, he was invited to join NUS, and in 1984, he won a scholarship from the Rockefeller Foundation in New York for training in geriatric psychiatry at Harvard. After that, he was invited by the WHO team to join the global study of dementia, and later he was invited by the UN in New York to speak at the World Forum on Depression. In 1999, the Minister of Health appointed him CEO and Medical Director of Woodbridge. He decided to rebrand the hospital as the Institute of Mental Health. Prof Kua has won many international research prizes, published 350 research papers and 30 books on mental health, aging, stress, and addiction. His first novel, Listening to Letter from America, is used in a course on anthropology at Harvard. Currently, Prof Kua also serves as the Vice Chairman of the Mind Science Center. Let us welcome Prof Kua on stage with a round of applause.
Thank you, Maureen. The Honorable Senior Minister, Mr. Teo Poh Yim, Dr. C.K. Cheong, Chairman of the Mind Science Center, Mr. Abdullah Tamugi, former Speaker of Parliament, Professor Chong Yap Sing, Dean of Medicine, friends, I've got one more, Mr. Toh Hing Tan, the benefactor of the Tao Tien Seng Distinguished Lecture Series, friends and colleagues. I understand there are many listening in from outside of Singapore, as far north as China, Malaysia, and south in Indonesia, and also in Australia. And a couple of friends from North America are also listening in. It is a beautiful Sunday afternoon here in Singapore. And before I give the lecture, I would like to say a few words about the late Mr. Tao Tien Seng. I have not met him, and I'm told by his son that he belonged to the pioneer generation and came to Singapore before the Second World War. He worked as a waiter for the British Merchant Navy and later the Dutch Royal Shell Company. And he imbued in his children a sense of filial piety, social responsibility, and also generosity. I'm glad to announce that these virtues are within the repertoire of the personality of his son, Mr. Tao Hing Tan, who is most supportive of the Mind Science Center and also has started a charity fund called Mind the Gap 200 for mental health. There are in NUS many research programs which are of translational relevance, meaning that the programs impacted the lives of people in the community. And one of these interesting programs is the Age Well Everyday Program. It is the first program in Asia on dementia prevention, a non-drug approach. And here in Singapore, as the senior minister has mentioned, There are 8 centers impacting the lives of over 3,000 elderly people. And it has been selected for presentation in the World Congress of Psychiatry in August. In the world, there are 4 centers doing research on dementia prevention. Besides our center, the center in Paris, in Finland, in Japan. And it's a feather in our cap that the Mind Science Center Age Well Everyday program has been selected. And one of the reasons being that this program is on a shoestring budget. And the donation comes mainly from many of our colleagues and friends who are in this room and also listening in. And we also have many volunteers, many of whom are in this room and also listening in the webinar. And this is a feather cap again. There's something that is achieved. And World Health is often looking for programs which can be applicable to other countries in Africa, South America, and these are cost-effective studies. But many people do not know that the Age Well Everyday program is in fact the brainchild of Mrs Teo Poh Yim, who came to a lecture I delivered at the Shangri-La Hotel on the 20th of August, 2014. And she told me that this study on this project at Jurong cannot just remain at Jurong. The seniors in other parts of Singapore must also benefit from this program. And she invited us to attend a meeting at the headquarters of the People Association at Jalan Besar. And there we met Senior Minister Lim Boon Heng, 3 other mayors, and 6 other members of parliament who were very impressed with this program. And one of the reasons being that the evidence base that we have from the research at Jurong. And I'll talk about this study. And what she mentioned to all of them was the hallmarks of the Age Well Everyday program. And Mrs. Teo mentioned that it is evidence-based, it's a structured program, and there is a measurable outcome. And so I'll tell you a bit on the evidence-based research. It was conducted at Jurong, and you'll see that it started in 2012. And just after 2 years, the editor of the distinguished medical journal called The Lancet told us that we should write a report in the Lancet, because he told us to wait for 5 years or 10 years is too long. You must tell the world what's happening. And what we did was to do a study at the Jurong Point shopping mall. This is the first time in Singapore or even Asia that a research team is anchored in a shopping mall. So although it started at 2012, the idea germinated in 2002. It took us 10 years. It's a long and winding road, and mainly because we couldn't get anyone to support us. There was no funding from anyone. In fact, in one of the agency that I went to, the lady asked me, "Have the Americans done it?" I said, "No." I gave a lecture in Harvard before, and I said, "No, nobody in America has done it." Then she asked me, "So how do you know it will be successful?" I told her, it doesn't mean that if the Americans have not done it, then we can't do it, and it will be a failure. And I said, we are doing research in the frontiers of research in terra incognita, no man's land. And we should never feel intellectually inferior to anyone. It is a new, interesting idea. And I'm very glad that some friends came on board to help us out. Mr. Lee Sun Tek from Lee Kim Ta family told me that, "Come to my shopping mall. We'll pay or we will help you to renovate the place, and to the tune of almost $300,000. And every year he'll give us a donation for 10 years. And we our partners at Jurong Point is the Presbyterian Community Service, and Mr. David Lim is somewhere in the audience. And also, besides that, the Kuan Yin Hut Cho Temple, Dr. Tan Chung Kim, gave us $1.8 million. So what we did was, There are 50 blocks of flat around the Jurong Point shopping mall. And our nurses will knock on every flat. It's a very tedious work. Anyone above 60 years, we welcome them down to the Jurong Point Center. The center is called Training and Research Academy. It's a very big name, Training and Research Academy. We wanted to impress some of our visitors. In fact, 2 professors of medicine from Harvard came down to see us. And coming to Jurong Point, the assessment will be free. If the elderly comes down to my clinic at NUH, you'll pay NUH about $200. They'll be too exorbitant. So at Jurong Point, it's free, and also there's less of a stigma. And they are assessed very thoroughly by doctors, by psychologists, and also the social health. And anyone with some memory problem will ask for a brain scan. So it's a very detailed assessment. And we know from our research of the World Health, and also we started a memory clinic in NUH 30 years ago, the data is massive. And from our data, we know that there is an association between hypertension, diabetes, and dementia. So from there, we asked all the elderly to come down, and those who are high risk. So this study is for people who have very high risk. They have some memory problem, they don't have dementia, but from our assessment, they have mild cognitive impairment, and even the people with depression, they don't have the full-blown symptoms of depression, there's a mild symptom, subclinical depression and subclinical anxiety. So can we do something to prevent them from tipping over to dementia or depression? The first part of the study is health education. So we'll tell them what is hypertension, what is diabetes, diet, exercise. And the second part, we divide them into 4 groups. One group we're doing Tai Chi, another group mindfulness, the third group music, and then art. So we allow them to choose whichever one they prefer. I was asked to give a lecture, or we were asked to give a lecture at Finland, one of the big centers. And the people in Finland were very impressed because they said, hey, there's something from Asia on mindfulness, on Tai Chi. The Scandinavian love something spiritual. So they said, this is something interesting. They told me, I wonder why some people in Asia want to come down to Finland to learn from us, because our program is very expensive. We've got to employ doctors, psychologists, but the Singapore program depends more on volunteers. And then after a year, some of the elderly will say, well, besides music, I may want to do something on mindfulness. So we allow them to select, choose. So you see that this is a very rigorous study, and there are many other programs that came along the way, including gardening. However, working in NUS, I love the debate amongst the researchers. Sometimes they disagree with me, which is excellent. So one of them told me that, well, this study is what they call a naturalistic study. Naturalistic study, meaning that people choose what they want to do. I said, this is life, isn't it? If I don't want to play golf, I don't want to play golf, I play tennis. But no, he said, in research, we must do a randomized control trial. That's the gold standard. The gold standard, ladies and gentlemen, is good for drug trial. But a psychosocial trial is very, very difficult. Well, having said that, they were never convinced. They said, we must do an RCT. So, okay, so we select two activities, mindfulness and health education. So for mindfulness, we had, at that time, the best trainer in mindfulness in the country, Mr. Wee Sin To. And for health education, 12 years ago, the best teacher at NUS medical school was Professor Goligan. So the head-to-head, the best person in mindfulness, the best person in education. And we have 2 groups of seniors and find out what happened to them. Before they start the study, we scan the brain, MRI scanning the brain. And then after 3 months and after 6 months. So you see in this picture, there's increase in the brain cells, brain activities for both, for mindfulness and also health education. So health education is also very effective. But the outcome has been that mindfulness is a bit much better than compared to health education. The data have been published in the World's Journal. This is the first paper done on mindfulness in seniors. Most of the studies done on mindfulness on young people. So this amazing appeared also in the American newspaper. The rest of there are 8 more research papers, and they are all in the book itself. The second one we did was to do something on the genetics. Before they start the study, we took some blood to check on the length of the telomeres. So these are the chromosomes. Our genes are stored inside the chromosomes, and these are the telomeres, the tail. As we grow older, the telomeres become shorter and shorter, and just before we die, it ends up here, and the whole chromosome opens up, the genes spill into the cell, and we perish. But you see in this study, the telomeres, instead of getting shorter, it becomes longer and longer for both. All right? But then what happened? Do they grow shorter and shorter again? Well, after the 3rd month, we told them, why not we do it once a month instead of doing every week? This is weekly, this is monthly. But in fact, you speak to Mrs Hua, you do it daily for mindfulness. But let's study weekly and monthly. So if weekly is much more effective. The next study was the idea of Professor Rati Mahindran, and she was saying that why not we find out what happened to gut bacteria. In our gut or intestine, there are millions and millions of bacteria. There are good bacteria, there are bad bacteria. The bad bacteria causes fever, diarrhea. The good bacteria causes a secretion of a neurotransmitter called serotonin, good for the brain. So this study is very interesting, and the first study in the world done on mindfulness and the microbiome, the gut bacteria. There's also another study on the immune system of the body, and is done by Dr. Ng Keng Siang, a Malaysian researcher who is now in North America. After that, we also have other studies on music reminiscence, and Mr. Tristan Gui is sitting down there as our lead researcher, and also another study on choir singing. Choral singing was the idea of Dr. Maureen Sarkok, our previous professor of obstetrics, and together with Professor Bernard Lansky for the Yong Siew Toh Conservatory of Music, and also Darius Lim, and the lead researcher is Dr. Feng Lei from China. And what they did was interesting was, besides assessing their mental health, they also scanned the brain at 0 time and after 3 years, after 1 year and 2 years. So this is the first study in the world on choir singing, on choral singing, whether it can delay the onset or prevent dementia. And it attracted a lot of attention from people in North America. They came down from Boston to see what we're doing here, and also from London. So this is a very interesting study. I have no time to run through the results. It's also in the book itself. The next study is on art, and the lead researcher is Professor Mahindran again. But the person who gave the idea was none other than our ambassador at large, Professor Tommy Koh. So Professor Tommy Koh rang me one day and said, hey, there's a report in the New York Times that they're doing a study on art for patients with dementia. And asked me, are you interested? He said, well, I told him I'll think about it. He said, well, you're interested, let me know, because at that time, Professor Tommy Koh was chairman of the National Arts Council. He said, I can make arrangement for the museum, art museum, to help you out. I happened to be in New York about the same time, and a friend of mine knew the chief executive of the Museum of Modern Art, where the study was done. And I visited the place with some friends, and I saw them doing the study, and they have paintings, original paintings of Pablo Picasso, Vincent van Gogh. So when I came back, I wrote a note to Professor Koh and said, well, I think it's an interesting study, but we should make it better than Americans. They've got patients, people with dementia, but we are going to have people who are before the dementia phase, people who are high risk, the preclinical, pre-dementia phase. And also we are going to do brain scan, which they haven't done in North America, and then see what happened to them. And once again, this study was conducted at the National Gallery. We're very glad for the people in National Gallery, and together the gallery here in NUS, and we trained the docents. And one of the people helping us out was our art therapist, Mr. Wong Lit Sun, who is listening now. Let me see. So after a year, we published the data, and once again, these are some of the studies, the wonderful studies that is done on art therapy that's using biological markers. So as you see all these studies, the whole study is colossal, it's huge, In fact, it took a toll on the last vestige of my youth. I used to look much younger than Professor John Wong, and now I'm aged so much after the study completed. But it's a wonderful study, and I enjoy it. And it is an interventional study. The editor of Nature, the prestigious journal, came to Singapore before the pandemic. And he invited me for coffee. He heard about this study. And he said, this is what the world should be doing, Intervention. He said, I received lots of papers from people telling me about the prevalence of dementia, the prevalence of depression is so much. He told me, so what with all this prevalence? Can you bring it down? Can you bring the depression rate down? That's what we want to know, And so this study is something that excites lots of people. And after 5 years, this is what we found. You see that at 0 time, the beginning of the study, the prevalence of depression is almost 8%, and then after 5 years, it's gone down. The anxiety, about 1.6, and here. Dementia rate, beginning was almost 2%, now it's 3%. Our researchers from Australia tell me that if you have 2%, after 5 years, it should be 6%, because age is a risk factor for dementia. As you grow older, the prevalence will increase. And so for this, the expected prevalence should be 6%, but now it's only 3%. Now the depression rate is very important because we have spent millions and millions of dollars training more doctors, more psychiatrists, more psychologists, but the suicide rate is still high. Sometime in 1995, the National Institute of Health in America sent me a note and asked me, would you like to join a big research, a global study on suicide? I said, sure, we'd like to join in, the Singapore study. And we found that, to our alarm, that the suicide rate for elderly Chinese men was 62 per 100,000, the second highest in the world. It was very alarming. And then we spoke to the people, the Ministry of Health. We did many things, and there are more day centers built, and more training for staff, more public talks given about depression and how to detect them. And the rate went down from 62 to just about 45. And this is the first time in the world that suicide rates have been brought down. We were invited to give a lecture at Chicago, and we told them the data, and it was amazing. The Americans said, this is fantastic, But now it's gone up again. It's almost reaching 60. This is very alarming. And before the pandemic, I was also asked on the CNA television, what can we do now? It's still going up. I said, well, we are doing a study at the time in Jurong, and I think if we can control the depression rate, depression is the mortality, that is suicide, that will be wonderful. Right? So there's something that we can do. Now, the Age 12 Everyday program is not static. It's moving on, it's organic, right? And we absorb lots of ideas from people around us. And I was telling a friend last week that if we don't have any new ideas, in Singapore, if we don't have any new ideas, Singapore will perish. We need to have new ideas to help us in our research, improve the quality of life of people. Some 15 years ago, I was invited to give a lecture at Cambridge, and I met a professor of economics, and he asked me, what are the factors which account for the economic miracle of Singapore? I told him the success of Singapore is because of 2 factors in the human mind: creativity and mental resilience, new ideas. And you will go to difficult times like the pandemic, you have to overcome this kind of situation. And the ideas for the research don't just come from scientists. And the next study comes from Mr. Lin Boon Heng. We are together in a webinar. In a seminar organized by the Chinese Women Association on aging in place. So Mr. Lim was telling people what must do, but then he whispered to me and said, "We don't have any data, Can you all do some studies?" So we have done a study on aging in place. The two people helping us out. There's Professor Wilson Tam and Vivian Wu. They're all in the audience, and also Tang Ling Ling. I think this study is to find out how we can build up bonding within the family. And if it's bonding in the family, then there's a higher chance that the children will want to look after the elderly. Last week, I saw a student in the university, and he was having depression and suicidal tendency. And I asked him, "What does your father do?" He said, "My father is an engineer." "Where does he work?" "I don't know." "What does your mother do?" "My mother is an accountant." "Where does he work?" "I think it's in the bank." So I asked him, "Don't you all eat together at night?" "No, I eat in my room." What do you think are the chances of this person want to take care of the parents when they grow old? They don't know each other. Many years ago, I was the Vice Dean of Medicine. I was in charge of the admission of JC students to medicine. And the students have an idea that, the chairman of that committee is Dr. Kua, And they came to see me and said, "Can we do a study of you on aging?" I said, "We don't want to do anything too highfalutin for all of you, all JC students. You're going to find out from your class how many are staying with their grandparents or they visit their grandparents often. And we find out for this group of people who live with their parents or visit their grandparents often, they are more eager to look after their own parents when they grow old. In contrast to another group of students who don't live with their grandparents, who hardly visit their grandparents, the idea of aging is what they see sometimes on television. Frailty, old people in old people's homes. To them, that's burden. That's a burden to them. So they told me that, it's a burden, it's the government's problem, not our problem. So these people are not too eager to take care of the elderly, or the elderly parents. So you see that this kind of study is very important, and I think Professor Wilson Tam will be probably extending to the community. The second study is by Professor Shifali Sholi, who's sitting here, on where there is no psychiatrist. If you do a study in Singapore, we know that the prevalence of depression is almost about 7-10%. 10% means that there are 50,000 cases. How are we going to manage 50,000 cases of depression? If you intend to make an appointment, anyone to see Professor John Wong, it's 3 months. It's overwhelming. So there must be a different way to tackle the problem. So what Dr. Shifali is doing is to whether we can train retired teachers, even servicemen, some simple techniques on psychological first aid, and they can manage them. And the more difficult cases, they escalate to the specialist to see. You cannot have 50,000 coming down to the place. It's impossible. So these are the interesting studies that we are doing. So you see that the study is not just about basic science, about brain cells, about MRI scanning, but also clinical medicine and also the social sciences. All right. And also, this study is, I mentioned to you that if you look at this, the name of this study is called Community Health and Intergenerational Study, CHI. And this title is given by Mrs. Teo. Mrs. Teo Poh Yim is someone who's not only creative, innovative, a sense of humor, we have an endearing memory of her. And so the study is not just about changing behavior, but also changing values. I gave a talk in North America, and I told them we're doing a study. They told me that changing behavior is not difficult, but changing values is very, very difficult. And I agree. I told them it's difficult, let's try it. Changing behavior is not difficult. If you don't wear a mask, the government will fine you, right? People wear masks, But you tell them, can you look after your parents? Do you thank or smile at the cleaners in the hospital? These are things that maybe we can do them by improvement. So you see the ideas grow along the way. And the next one is on something that's very interesting on the green urbanism. We worked hand in glove with the people at national parks, and we started off the therapeutic gardens, which is now available in about 8 centers around Singapore. And there's also a research paper published in Nature on the study. Angela Sia is from NParks and doing a PhD. And it stirred up a lot of interest on people. And in fact, after I finished the study, the CEO of NParks told me, well, you spend a lot of time with all of us. Can we ask you to plant a tree? So I said, okay, that would be a great honor. I said, what tree would you like to plant? She thought I would ask for a durian tree. So I said, no, I'm asking for a nutmeg tree. He said, nutmeg? Why nutmeg? I said, why not nutmeg? So I told him that 500 years ago, there was a pandemic in Europe called the Black Death due to the bubonic plague. And there was no cure, and someone said, the cure is from the juice of the nutmeg. 500 years ago. And then the Portuguese came down first. Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope and reached India. And then a Portuguese admiral, Alfonso de Albuquerque, sailed across the Bay of Bengal, came down to Malacca. The conquest of Malacca was in 1511. Immediately after the conquest of Malacca, he sent 2 ships to look for the Moluccas Island where the nutmeg was grown. And after the Portuguese came the Dutch and then the English. And that's how we're all here speaking English. Now, after all this has been done, I was invited for lunch by the chairman of NParks, Mr. Benny Lim, and Mr. Abdullah Tamgi was down there also, and he asked me, any other new ideas? Well, I told him that we should do something interesting on the rainforest. We should get a group of people to walk through the rainforest and find out about the physical, mental health, and the social health. And we found that very interesting data from there. We found that these people began to care for one another, walking to the rainforest, a sense of empathy and compassion. So now, especially now in the pandemic, there are few people in that study who are widows and widowers. So their friend will say, can I help to buy the groceries for you? Can I help to get medicine for you in the hospital? So there's a sense of compassion. And I also noticed that they began to love the rainforest, because we also asked the chairman of the NParks to get someone to follow us. Every time we walk through the rainforest, you see some beautiful trees. We have the faintest idea what's the name of this tree. Even so, some of us who drive along the roads in Singapore, they're beautiful trees. What's the name? We don't even know. So this person will come along with us and tell us what's the medicinal value of this tree, what's the name of this tree. So the people began to develop a love for the trees. And at the end of the study, they donated 60 trees as part of the 1 million tree project of national parks. This is tremendous, this kind of response. I presented some of the data in the international conference, and the chairman of that symposium was a chap from Brazil. He told me, this is a marvelous study. He told me that, do you know that Amazon rainforest is about 20 to 30,000 times the size of Singapore, and people are burning it down. The deforestation is one of the causes of global warming. That Singapore can play a role, but you tell people this study, more people will love the rainforest, will not do anything to destroy it. Some of you may not know that only 2 cities in the world with rainforest in the city, Singapore and Rio de Janeiro. So you're hoping that we can publish this data and get it on to tell people about what we're doing. And it's picked up very fast because after the paper was published, we got a phone call from the World Congress, and they said, you should come and share with people and tell people what we can do to prevent global warming. The role we play is very small, and I think they told me the people from Singapore should be able to speak up. I think a lot of times with things that we've done well, we're sometimes a bit more diffident. I'm not too sure why. A good example is the life expectancy. The life expectancy in Singapore is 84 years. North America is 79, England 81. So someone asked me, why is that you're still asking a lot of foreigners to come to Singapore to teach you people about aging? When you people be going across to Europe and North America to talk about longevity. So I think something for us, maybe Singaporean, I'm not too sure whether the minister will agree with me that we are maybe low self-esteem, that someone said, oh, it's a colonial mentality. Well, we have been independent 57 years now. So this project will be presented in the World Congress also. About 20 years ago, the tsunami struck Aceh, and the Indonesian government assembled a team for the mental health response to help the victims. The chief of psychiatry from Jakarta sent me a note, can you join this team to help out? So I certainly would like to help out. And they told me that, do you know that although the tidal wave destroyed Aceh, certain parts of the beach were still intact because of the mangrove swarms. The mangrove swarm had deep roots. And behind the mangrove swamp were the rainforests. The rainforests also had deep roots, so they were never destroyed by the tsunami. There's something very interesting about the kind of how the trees grow together, the roots cling together and prevent them from destruction. I love to go to the National Gallery and with my grandkids, and there's also a place there called the Keppel Room for the kids to do some drawing. This is what they did. They did a drawing, and they see the trees, the rainforest, the trees are clinging together. Something of a metaphor for I think for the community, that we are like rainforests. We cling together, and it's something wonderful that we can, as a symbol, a metaphor of solidarity. I know in the audience is the director from People Association, and also Thomas somewhere, also PA. And if the PA wants to change the logo to something more inspiring, this can be a good logo for you to go into. All right. And I want to announce that a friend of mine, a writer and a poet, Mr. Koh Bak Song, has just released a new book called One United People. And you'll recognize it's a line taken from National Pledge. And I'm amazed because he has included the Age Well Everyday program into one of the chapters of this book. When the Age Well Everyday program was first started, it was conceived as a platform for dementia prevention, but now it's also perceived as a platform to unite the community. One united people needs the vision of people who pace the corridors of power to leaders. It needs the imagination of builders and planners to lay the foundation. It needs the creativity of writers, poets, musicians, and artists to touch the soul of the nation. And it needs the humanity of people like Mrs Teo Poh Yim, who could empathize with the universality of our feelings to grow old with dignity. She enlightened us by her insights, stirred us by her commitment, and inspired us by her dedication. The success of the Age Well Everyday program is a fulfillment of her purpose-driven life. Thank you.